Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. And so, wherever you're joining us, whether you're in California, Michigan, Colorado, wherever it is on your porch, thank you for joining us. Again, I think this message, that the message of Jesus, this message that the world can be restored, that we can live our very best lives right here, right now, that message, it's dying to be shared. And so I'm so happy to be a part of the conversation. So today, please look at the descriptions below, how to support what's going on. Click on the link below, all of it. See what's going on with this ministry we call Ethos. So we have been moving through this series, and again, a new way to be human. That's what we have chosen to call this because, again, the teachings of Jesus essentially are just that, how to be more beautifully human. Being human is not a bad thing. It's actually a really beautiful thing. And so learning to be a better version of yourself is exactly what Jesus talked about over and over again. And once we learn to do this, it spills over into community. And that's the idea you see in this message called the Sermon on the Mount. And so again, Jesus goes up to this mountain, on the top of the mountain, and any Jewish person during the first century, they are immediately making the connection to Moses. Moses, who goes up on the mountain, shares about the Ten Commandments, the law, how to live in shalom together where nothing is missing, nothing broken. This all is connected to it. And so they see Jesus, who is the next Moses 2.0, and he's sharing about what it means to be human. And so, again, we have this quote that we've been just love using throughout the series, and I'll read it to you one more time. The Sermon on the Mount is actually a deeper critique into the heart of the law. I love that idea there. It reclaims the beauty of living life in harmony. So again, if you want to sum up, again, summing up doesn't take away, but to sum up what it means to live in life, live a life in harmony and community, this would be it. These are very simple, generalized ways of living life in community, how to live shalom. And so again, in the context that it's written, these people, these Jewish people, again, this was written for Jewish people, they lost everything. They lost their home. They lost family members, neighbors, all of these people murdered at the hands of Rome. And so they lost their temple, their religious structure, and they're asking the question, what's next? Where is our hope? And so the teachings of Jesus, they surface again at that point. Well after 70 AD, the teachings of Jesus reemerge, and they begin to be the catalyst for change. And that's the beauty of the message. And so the law is given, Jesus becomes the next Moses 2.0 in the eyes of the Jewish readers. And then as you read through this thing called the Sermon on the Mount, we've read about the blessings, the curses, and now we've been getting into more of like the deeper verse-by-verse study, which again, I think is really important. And no wonder it's taken us so many weeks to cover this because it's so deep. And so the next version, the next part of this that we're on now is a really popular one. And this we've seen over and over again in like cards, Hallmark cards or sermons or where you will recognize this immediately is what I'm trying to tell you. So let me read you the verse. And again, I promise you, when you hear this, you're going to have some assumptions because you've heard it before. So here we go. Enter in through the narrow gate, because the gate is wide and the way is broad. That leads to destruction. And there are many who enter in through it, because the gate is narrow and the way is hard pressed, which leads to life. And there are few who find it. Yeah, you've heard this verse. You're getting pictures of different paths, all that kind of stuff. Depending on your tribe, you might have some different pictures painted of this image. It's a really interesting one. Now, if you were a Jewish person and you heard this spoken from a rabbi who is quoting the Torah, you immediately make connections. Again, you're Jewish. You've read these stories. You know Torah inside and out. And so Deuteronomy 30:15 through 20, it gives a very popular message about paths. And so let me read it to you because many people would argue Jesus is actually borrowing from the old to show the new. And so this is what it says. See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, and death and adversity. Do you see the two? There's this way that's life that brings life, prosperity. There's this way that brings death and adversity. Two different paths. In that I command you today to love the Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in his ways and keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments, that you may live and multiply, and that Yahweh your Elohim may bless you in the land where you are entering to possess it. But if your hearts turn away and you will not obey, you are drawn away and worship other Elohim and serve them. I declare to you today that you shall surely perish. So again, two different paths. It's a very common metaphor. If you go this way, it's going to bring death. Wrong door, right? That door had lions. Oops, this one has gold. Which path are you going to choose? And so for these people who are basically wandering nomadic people, the idea here of paths would have made absolute sense. To any hiker today that's still going out in nature, this makes perfect sense, because paths, the idea here is, again, it's a metaphor. One way is going to bring life. One way is going to bring death. And so when you're looking ahead, which path do you choose? Take time, consider. That's the deeper picture here of the metaphor. You're walking, you're moving, right? That's a big perspective right there to understand. The spiritual journey is not one that we just sit and do nothing. We would never get to a path. We never get to a choice if we were just sitting in a waiting room waiting for something to take place. The beauty of the spiritual path, the walk, is that you are moving, you're walking. And at various points in time, you have to make a decision. Ultimately, that's going to happen over and over again, right? And so the two paths, we only know the beauty of the decision, of course, in hindsight. I think of Robert Frost in his poem. You make a decision, you choose it, you do the very best you can, and then, of course, years later, you look back. And in hindsight, that's where we kind of learn some lessons. Oh, man, when I chose that path, I should have done this, or when I did this, whatever. We learn from the mistakes. We are able to become better and better at the next paths and crossroads we run into. That's the idea here. And so what Israel does over and over again throughout their story. And again, remember, the Bible, Torah, it's their story. Yeah, it's important to remember that. It's their story. We use it today because we find tremendous beauty in it, meaning, right? It's jam-packed with so much wisdom. We're using their story. We're borrowing their story. But for Israel, they continue looking back, and they understand that there are many different cycles that Israel keeps falling into. And typically the life cycle, the spiritual journey for Israel, it always looked like this. It looked like a 4-part journey. And we've talked a little bit about this today, but I'm going to move even in the past, but I want to move a little deeper today. And so it always starts with this. They end up in exile. And exile is that place where we made a lot of poor choices. And it has landed us in a place where there's pain, there's brokenness, right? And I think many of us in our own journeys, there were decisions we made. There were choices, right? There were certain actions we took, and we didn't maybe think them all the way through. And because of that, they've landed us in some pretty painful places. And so Israel, over and over again as a nation, they land in exile. And they kind of become the stepping stone for all these other countries and empires. This just happens over and over again. So after exile, they begin calling out, God save us, God grant us exodus. And of course, what takes place then is the cry gets loud enough that the people begin to come together as one. And they leave, they exodus, right? When they leave and they exodus, they go into the time of wandering. And this is where this 40-year journey, again, anyone who's ever studied the Middle East would understand that it would take maybe 15 days, right, to go from Egypt to Jordan. It wouldn't take that long. It would not take 40 days, let alone 40 years. But we understand the deeper metaphor here. They go into wandering, right? They wander for a bit. They look around. They're constantly learning and unlearning certain things. That's the beauty of wandering. Next, you cross the Jordan. You fully submerge yourself into a new kind of life, a new kind of way of living. And you do that and you cross over. And when you do that, you basically embody the promised land. You live in it fully. You experience a time of peace and prosperity. So, this theme over and over again, you will see it in the Bible because essentially they're telling their story. And their story is a cyclical story that happens over and over and over again. And so the story of Adam and Eve, it's a big, big, beautiful metaphor, right? Don't go too far with literalism here because it gets weird. Look at the bigger, deeper metaphor. Adam and Eve, they're the story of Israel. So watch what I mean. They're given a promise, right? They're given a promise. They choose the wrong direction, and they end up in exile. They are exiled from this beautiful garden. And so what happens? They wander a bit, right? They wander in Eden. And the question that again, this is beautifully written because it's left open-ended. The question is, will we ever get back? We left for the promised land. Will we ever get back? And that's the beginning of this beautiful story. And so over and over again, you're going to see how they get back, how they wander, how they exile, how they get back. And so you'll see this again in the story of Moses, right? Given the promise, goes the wrong direction, goes to Egypt, leaves Egypt, wanders, experiences the promised land. You'll see this with Jacob. Yeah, Jacob. Jacob, he's given a promise. He unfortunately goes the wrong direction. He makes some poor decisions. He becomes very deceitful with his family and his friends. He goes into exile. He goes to Laban's, right? There in Laban's, he begins to multiply and prosper. And he leaves Laban's place, right? He leaves that place where there's some nastiness, right? He's been deceived. He's being kind of enslaved almost. That's the idea there. He leaves, he wanders, he wrestles with God. What a beautiful perspective there. When we are in our time of wandering, when we're learning and relearning certain cycles, we're leaving some and we're picking up new. What if we consider that as like, I'm wrestling with the divine. I'm wrestling with the divine. I'm trying to figure it out. And I'm not going to let go until I see it, until it makes sense. And when it makes sense, when you've wrestled long enough, you walk into the promise. The promise is revealed. Shalom is experienced. That's the beauty. We get this with the story of Joseph and his technicolored, his suit, right? His robe. We see that here again. Joseph is the picture of Israel. Abraham is the picture of Israel. Moses is the picture of Israel. Jacob, all of them. They're all deeper metaphors of Israel. Were they real or not? Well, maybe, maybe not. People still discuss that. But don't miss the beautiful meaning here. Joseph, given a promise, right? He gets the nice coat. And then he misuses the power. He kind of hoards it over his brothers and they don't like it, right? He gets thrown into the little well, right? There he's picked up by these slave people, right? These people are going to take him into slavery. He goes into Egypt. He's in bondage. He's a slave. Then after this, he's freed from prison, right? He calls out to the divine. He's freed. His family crosses the desert. Israel. You get it. And then the promise is received. It's all there. The story over and over again. And the deeper understanding here is this: don't miss it. It's the only way to experience growth, freedom. The only way to get there is through struggle. It's not through avoidance. It's through struggle. It's aiming deep, right? It's going deep. It's not trying to cross the chasm in the shortest way. It's actually going into it, going into the chasm, going through the depth and the brokenness and the pain, going through it. Because again, an aimless, wide path, it's kind of an empty one. And I think a lot of people will choose that because it's easy. It just kind of meanders off. It does its own thing. No struggle, no pain. You just avoid everything. But that's a pretty meaningless, empty life. But the way to bring peace, the way to find real freedom, real growth, is when you face those demons on. You go straight at the issues, at the problems. You deal with it now. You don't put it off. You walk through it. And when you do, you experience a victory. You actually experience freedom. And so in Matthew 7, I love the ending of this verse. It says, there are few who find it. There are few that find it. It's sad, but it's true. Because there are fewer and fewer people who are willing to do the difficult, hard work. And that's why, again, I think oftentimes Christianity becomes kind of an escape plan. Rather than like delving, learning how to live in this life fully, we oftentimes will think of ways to escape it. And that becomes our hope. Whereas the reality is, it was never about escape. It was learning how to live it fully right here where there are problems, there is pain, there is brokenness, but learning to live through it, move through it. That's where the real life is. Simply having an escape plan where you jump on an asteroid and take off, that's not real life. And it's pretty meaningless. And so real life, very few will search for it. But here's the thing, we experience the kingdom of heaven not by avoiding pain, by delving into it. And this is what Jesus over and over again will call the promised land. Jesus will say over and over again, look, here's the promise. And so when you look at the story, the narrative of Jesus is right there. A promise of a Savior's delivered. In the middle of this, remember, Jesus will wander for the 40 days. He does exactly, he shows, I am the picture of Israel. Whether you believe he literally did it or the writers insert this, for me, it's less and less important. What's important is the message here. Jesus casts a vision for the kingdom of heaven. He shares it with people. They begin to cry out for it. And again, new life through death. It's beautiful. The new life emerges, resurrection right around the corner. We see the story over and over and over again. Even the stories Jesus told. Think about this one, the prodigal son. Prodigal son, there's a promise of inheritance. Yay, I'm going to get a bunch of money. Dad has to die first. He chooses, right, power over wisdom. Yeah, not a smart move. It lands him next to swine, which again, if you're a Jewish person, you're not eating much bacon. Pigs are bad, right? And so it lands him in the middle of pain and brokenness. He's feeling empty. He chose power over wisdom. Yeah, he goes into exile, but then he begins to cry out for home. You see the story, it's Israel's story over and over again, cries out for home. He believes the promise that dad might accept him back. He could live in harmony, shalom with family again. He goes back, he's accepted in, he experiences promised land. This is the story. And it's a difficult story, right? It's not an easy story, but it is the story. It's our story. It's struggle. It's pain. It's victories, right? It's all of those things, the good, bad, and the ugly. All of it together. That's where the life is. It's narrow. It's not easy. Yeah. I love this. You will prolong, again, Deuteronomy 30:15-20. You will prolong your days in the land where you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess it. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you the life and death, the blessing and curse. So choose life in order that you may live, you and your descendants. Again, there are paths in front of us. There's good, there's bad, right? There's avoidance. We can just avoid the difficult conversations, the difficult growth, or we can move through them. We can say, I'm going to choose to move through the difficult. I'm going to choose to move through the cycles. I'm going to break them, and I'm going to start again. You can only get to promised land, real healing, real freedom, if you do the difficult work. And that's the narrow way. And really the narrow way, it's the most direct. It's the most direct, but it's definitely not the easiest. But it is the most direct. And so if I could sum up Jesus' words, this is what I would say. Finding kingdom life isn't easy, but it's the only way to find life more abundantly. It's not easy, but it is the best way to find life more abundantly. And it's a struggle. Life is. It just is. So how do we do this? Because again, it's the easiest thing in the world to talk about it. How do we live it? Here are a couple principles that I'm finding are really helpful in order to learn to live this 4-part journey. Number 1 is this. I'm learning to take responsibility. This is my life, my decisions. It's very easy to play the victim card, put all of my issues and all of the blame on everybody else. But once I can take ownership that this is my story, there's something really beautiful about the story of Israel when you think about it. Over and over again in the Bible, this is the underdog, right? We don't read many stories where you hear about the underdog and how they keep getting broken over and over and over again. Yeah, that's not a story that most people tell, but that's why I love it, because it's our story. And once we say, this is my story, this is the truth, it's good, bad, and ugly, and I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm changing, I'm human. Once we take responsibility of the choices we've made, of the actions we've taken, once we can take responsibility, it opens up so many new opportunities. Number 2, there's growth in struggle. There is absolutely no growth in avoidance. Escapism will never solve your problems. You will never become the person you're hoping you will be if you simply sit and pretend away all of your problems. Real growth, real change, real freedom always has a price. And the price is struggle. It's moving through the difficult stuff. It's saying, I'm not going to just sit back and watch my life happen. I'm going to live it fully, which means beauty, pain, brokenness, victory, freedom, all of it all together. It's the sweet and the sour. The next one is this: I'm learning to have better problems. And what I mean by that is simple. I am choosing what problems I decide to take on. I don't have to, every single issue out there doesn't have to be mine, right? I can have better problems. I can choose what is important and what's not. I can choose what hill I die on and which ones I don't. I can even choose to just not die on a hill, right? I can choose better problems because there will be a plethora of them in life. Choose better problems. And lastly, or almost lastly, the next one, stop comparing yourself to others. This is a big one for me. Whenever I've started to compare myself, judge my victories by somebody else, I'm no longer living my story. I'm basically trying to live someone else's. And truth is, that person's story, it's already been told. It's already being told. You have a specific, beautiful story. Live your story, not someone else's. And then lastly, embrace the uncertainty. Nothing in life is certain except for death and taxes, right? There's some truth to that. There's not a lot of certainty in life. And so embrace it. Understand we don't know. There's so much we don't know. Learn to embrace it. And once I do, I no longer have to be in control all the time. I can learn to walk down the path. I can learn to accept it for what it is. It's a path. It's dangerous. It weaves around sometimes. Sometimes I'm not sure if I'm going to make it or not, but it's the path. And so learn to accept that it's uncertain. It's dangerous sometimes. It's unsettling. It's life. Learn to accept that that's what life is. And when we do, man, life more abundantly just happens. So again, in the words of Jesus, if I could sum them up, finding kingdom life isn't easy, but it's the only way to find life more abundantly. I hope you enjoyed this. As always, please consider donating to www.ethos-church.org/donate. Give tax-deductible donations. Again, we'd love to partner with you. We think these messages are so important. We think they can change the world, just like Jesus did. And so we want to share this with everyone we can. And to do this, it takes a lot of resources. So please consider walking with us and support us in this. Secondly, we do a live discussion twice a month, the first and the third Saturday of every month. So please consider joining us. We get some really great discussions. Email me at tonywerfel@gmail.com. I'll respond back. I'll send you the link. It's so much fun. Lastly, subscribe to this YouTube channel. We'll let you know every time a new video is posted, and you can just click that little bell there, and that'll tell you every time something comes up. Everyone, I love you so much. Thank you for joining us. We've only got a couple more of these Sermon on the Mount series, and I just love this. This verse-by-verse study brings so much life. Everyone, take care, love you, and we'll talk soon.